Hello, Namaskar, and welcome to the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. So, has the time come when India might just be thinking of deploying gunboat diplomacy against Maldives? Gunboat diplomacy is a strategy, it's an act of deterrence, which I don't think so India has ever deployed against any of its neighbors. But perhaps the time has come where we might at least be thinking of deploying this particular strategy. I want to sound a note of caution here. I have no information that the government of India is actually thinking on these lines. This is purely an idea which I am floating because, as analysts, I think it is our job to float and give these ideas in the public domain, and hopefully, somebody in the government is listening to these podcasts. Now, you would be wondering that what is gunboat diplomacy and what is the need to use this strategy against Maldives. फर्स्ट लेट मी जैसे कहते हैं, पहले मैं आपको बड़े एक संक्षिप्त में बताना चाहूंगा कि गन बोट डिप्लोमेसी क्या चीज होती है. Gunboat diplomacy is the deployment of your naval assets, that is the naval assets of a country, against another country to deter, to intimidate that country. And how do you deter? How do you intimidate another country? You can send your destroyers, your warships. You can, if you have aircraft carriers, you can send your aircraft carriers against that country. As we all know that aircraft carriers जो होते हैं उनके ऊपर fixed wing aircraft होते हैं, उनके ऊपर missiles होती हैं, and if these are used, these are very lethal. These can in fact change the entire theater of war. One aircraft carrier is equivalent to, completely changing the fortunes of a smaller country. These can be very lethal, can be very dangerous. So you can send destroyers are equally lethal. तो आप ये सब assets आप भेज सकते हैं and you can intimidate a country. I'll give you a couple of examples. जैसे अभी recently आज ही आपने अगर शायद papers पढ़े होंगे तो उसमें आपने पढ़ा होगा कि China has been doing this against Philippines, for instance. अभी वो कोस्ट गार्ड तक ही लिमिटेड है, डिस्ट्रॉयर्स वहां नहीं पहुंचे, बट नियर द स्प्रैटली आइलैंड्स चाइना ने अपने कुछ कोस्ट गार्ड अपनी जो शिप्स हैं डिप्लॉय करी हैं, एंड दे हैव बीन व्हाट आर कॉल्ड यूजिंग वाटर कैनन्स ऑन देयर शिप्स ऑन द फिलिपीन वेसल्स, और उसमें कुछ लोग इंजर्ड भी हो गए हैं. सो दैट इज अनदर फॉर्म ऑफ गनबोट डिप्लोमेसी. But I'll give you the most famous example of gunboat diplomacy where we were at the receiving end. जी हाँ, हम रिसीविंग एंड पे थे, और ये बहुत साल पुरानी बात है जबकि हम इतने ताकतवर नहीं थे. वी वर स्टिल अपकमिंग. Today, of course, everybody knows we are a rising power. We have a powerful military, a very powerful navy actually. But मैं आपको पुराने ज़माने के टाइम पे ले चलता हूँ, और बहुत ही एक फेमस इंसिडेंट था. दैट वाज इन 1971, दैट फेमस वॉर विद पाकिस्तान. तो उस टाइम यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स वाज कंप्लीटली ऑन द साइड ऑफ पाकिस्तान, and the then president, the US president, that is Richard Nixon, he had ordered the 7th Fleet, और 7th Fleet में उनका एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर था जिसका नाम था USS Enterprise, to go to the Bay of Bengal and threaten India. जी हाँ, बिल्कुल आपने सही सुना. तो उस टाइम वो जो एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर उसको बे ऑफ बंगाल की तरफ भेज दिया गया था. बट लकीली we had friends at that time who came to our help, and that friend, of course, at that time was the Soviet Union. And as countermeasures, the Soviet Union dispatched submarines towards the Bay of Bengal to stop the 7th Fleet, to stop the USS Enterprise from threatening India. यानी कि एक तरह से यूएस ने अपनी गनबोट डिप्लोमेसी अगेंस्ट इंडिया लॉन्च कर दी थी, लेकिन बट अनदर शो ऑफ नेवल फोर्स बाय द यूएसएसआर, दैट इज द सोवियत यूनियन, स्टॉप्ड द यूएसएस एंटरप्राइज इन इट्स ट्रैक्स. तो कहने का मतलब है, आई गेव यू द एग्जांपल टू टेल यू दैट नेशंस, स्पेशली जिसे हम कहते हैं विकसित जो देश होते हैं, और पुराने टाइम में तो वेस्टर्न नेशंस ही विकसित देश होते थे, तो जो आपके डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज होती हैं, दे डिप्लॉय देयर नेवल एसेट्स टू समटाइम्स चेंज द कोर्स ऑफ थिंग्स टू इंटिमिडेट स्मॉलर countries. And maybe now, because there's a role reversal which has happened. We are quite a powerful country now. Maybe the time has come. Maybe we might have to deploy some of those assets, some of those ideas, some of those strategies against countries who are not listening to us or who are creating trouble for us, like the Maldives, for instance. और एक बड़ी फेमस सेइंग है, और उस टाइम के रिचर्ड डिक्सन के उस टाइम जो सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट होते थे हेनरी किसिंजर, हु एज यू नो पास्ट अवे रिसेंटली, किसिंजर की एक बहुत ही फेमस लाइन है जिसे मैं यहाँ पर रीट्रेट करूंगा, मैं आपको बताना चाहूंगा, एंड दैट लाइन इज दैट एन एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर इज 10,000 tons ऑफ डिप्लोमेसी। जी हाँ, यानी कि आप you can spend hours and hours of diplomacy, you can keep going to different capitals in the world, but an aircraft carrier, and an aircraft carrier, समझिए कि aircraft carrier is like a small township which is floating on the sea, and that township has hundreds of aircraft, it has missiles, it can change the course of a war completely, it can change the fortunes of a country, and it is maybe equivalent or even more potent than the entire diplomatic effort we put in. तो यानी कि गनबोट डिप्लोमेसी मतलब वर्क्स, ऐसा नहीं है कि वर्क नहीं करती, बट यू हैव टू बी वेरी वेरी केयरफुल हाउ यू use this strategy, because it can backfire also, and you can land with egg on your face, or you can be blacklisted by the nations, by countries in the world. So you have to be very careful before you deploy a strategy of gunboat diplomacy. लेकिन क्या वजह हो गई है कि आज हम ये नौबत आ गया कि हम इसके बारे में सोच भी सकते हैं कि हमें शायद अपने नेवल एसेट्स मॉलडीव्स के अगेंस्ट डिप्लॉय करने पड़े. व्हाट हैज रियली हैपेंड? तो as again you might have read in the papers, only in the last 48 hours, Maldives has signed a defense agreement with China. And it's a secret defense agreement because the details of that agreement have not been made public. और चाइना कभी भी जो अपने जो डिफेंस एग्रीमेंट की डिटेल्स होता है वो ठीक तरह से कभी शेयर नहीं करता वर्ल्ड के साथ. वी ऑब्वियसली नो अबाउट इट ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम. But it could be anything. It could be the fact that they might be stationing their warships around Maldives. They could be sending troops to Maldives. They could be taking some of their islands on lease and converting that into a naval center, into a forward-looking naval center which threatens entire shipping, for instance, in the Indian Ocean. That the details of their agreement are not known, but anything is possible with Muizu being in charge of Maldives, and everybody knows he has these pro-China tendencies and links. So anything is possible in this agreement, and this agreement threatens one and one only country in the entire region, and that is India. Because it literally means if China then gets a major foothold in Maldives, then it directly threatens the entire southern seaboard of India. यानी कि आप ये समझ लीजिए कि अगर वहां चाइनीज बेस बन जाता है, और आप with Chinese you can never be complacent. आपने देखा होगा कि जैसे आप लाइन जो मतलब वहां पर जो बाउंड्रीज के जो लाइन ऑफ कंट्रोल है उसके बाद इवन इन द नॉर्दर्न सेक्टर चाइनीज ने अपनी तरफ जो उन्होंने हट्स और ये वो जब चीज़ें बनाई हैं, कितनी जल्दी अपना इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर ये लोग तैयार कर देते हैं. देन दे मूव देयर फोर्सेस, देन दे मूव their military equipment very rapidly. So they're quite capable of doing the same thing in Maldives. And if that happens, that means, as I said, our entire southern seaboard is threatened. But uske साथ साथ, and what is really worrying is कि हमारे जो naval assets है वो वहां पर they will come under the line of sight of the Chinese. Don't forget, we have the Kalpakkam nuclear reactor in the southern belt. इसके अलावा जितनी शिपिंग लेन्स हैं, आपकी जितनी शिपिंग है, जो आपकी जो if the Chinese establish some kind of a hegemonistic, that is the word to use, sway over that entire region, then the entire shipping traffic can be threatened around that entire area. यानी कि पूरा का पूरा जो सदर्न जो कोस्ट लाइन, सदर्न सीबोर्ड जिसे कि टेक्निकल टर्म्स में कहते हैं, दैट कैन कम अंडर द इन्फ्लुएंस, अंडर द गेज, अंडर द स्ट्रैंगल होल्ड ऑफ द चाइनीज, विच विल बी अ रियली बिग प्रॉब्लम फॉर इंडिया. यानी कि एक छोटी सी कंट्री लाइक मॉलडीव्स कैन क्रिएट अ ह्यूज प्रॉब्लम फॉर इंडिया. एंड दैट इज वाई this is what is really at stake at the moment, because this defense agreement actually has sent alarm bells ringing in India. So This is what is really at stake, and this is what we need to remember before we even start thinking of what kind of options do we have against Maldives. तो अब आते हैं ऑप्शंस पे. लेट्स फर्स्ट डिस्कस कि व्हाट इज, हमने ये समझ लिया कि व्हाट इज एट स्टेक. दिस इज समथिंग व्हिच इज ऑलमोस्ट लाइक an emergency in a certain way, military emergency, because agar humne, if we don't move in fast, then the situation could spin out of control. And as already you might have been reading in the papers, Muzu is giving deadlines कि by May, I think May 10th वो बोल रहा है कि the Indian troops, whether they are in military uniform or whether they are civilians, all Indians have to get out of Maldives, which is again a big threat. It's not only a threat, it's a big insult to us also in a certain way, the language and the tenor of whatever he is saying. So there are a lot of factors to consider out there. And therefore, there is a certain timeline against which the Indian government has to think and act now. और जो हमारे ट्रेडिशनल मेथड्स है, नाउ आई कम टू दी ऑप्शन, जो हमारे ट्रेडिशनल ऑप्शन से एट द मोमेंट इट डज नॉट लुक लाइक एनी ऑफ दोज ऑप्शंस आर वर्किंग आउट, एंड आई विल गो विद दोज ऑप्शंस वन बाय वन. तो वी स्टार्टेड सम टाइम बैक, जबकि ये सारा फ्रकस शुरू हुआ म्यूजिक के साथ, व्हेन ही गेव द रैलिंग क्राई इन द इलेक्शंस ऑफ गेट आउट इंडिया. तो उस टाइम हमने, जैसे कहते हैं, एक मॉरल प्रेशर हमने अप्लाई करा, बोथ फ्रॉम द इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड स्पेशली फ्रॉम द सोशल मीडिया. देयर वाज अ लॉट ऑफ रिएक्शन इन द सोशल मीडिया. और उस टाइम आपको याद होगा, प्रधानमंत्री जो है वो लक्षद्वीप गए थे, और वहाँ पर वो फेमस शॉट्स आए थे, प्रधानमंत्री लक्षद्वीप के बीचेस पे थे, एंड एवरीबॉडी फेल्ट कि हमें जो अपना टूरिज्म है लक्षद्वीप में डेवलप करना चाहिए, वी शुड मूव अवे फ्रॉम मॉलडीव्स. एंड उसका रिएक्शन भी हुआ. द रिएक्शन वाज दैट अ लॉट ऑफ द टूरिस्ट इनफ्लो फेल going from India to Maldives. तो वो सब हुआ. But that is not enough to deter Maldives, as now it seems, because we thought maybe the tourist inflow goes down, they will come to their senses and see the light of the day. But unfortunately, I don't think so that has happened. साथ साथ एक दो और डेवलपमेंट्स हुई वहाँ पर, जैसे कि आप, if you don't know, then let me also acquaint you with the fact that Maldives की जो opposition party है, especially the Maldivian Democratic Party, that is the MDP, it is run by a person called Abdullah Shahid. So Abdullah Shahid to some extent is pro-India. He has made many statements which are positive towards India. He said we cannot do without India. और आपको थोड़ा सा वेरी ब्रीफली ये कॉन्टेक्स्ट समझना पड़ेगा कि वाई इंडिया इज इंपॉर्टेंट टू मॉलडीव्स इन अ ट्रेडिशनल सेंस, बिकॉज इट्स नॉट ओनली द मिलिट्री इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, द aviation platforms like Dorniers and other aircraft and helicopters which we have given to Maldives. But the fact also is that there's a lot of medical supplies which go from India to Maldives. जो लोग जब उनको बीमार हो जाते हैं Maldives के अंदर, जब उनको एक, जिसे कहते हैं कि उनको एक स्पेशलाइज्ड ट्रीटमेंट चाहिए, तो वो लोग सारे इंडिया आते हैं फॉर ट्रीटमेंट. सो देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ back and forth which keeps on happening between India and Maldives. There's a cooperation. Tourism तो खैर है ही, जैसे मैंने आपको पहले बताया. तो ये सब aspects हैं. But it seems Muizu is not impressed. He does not concern himself with all these factors. And even though the MDP under Abdullah Shahid is very pro-India, but it does not look like as if something can be done to change Muizu's mindset. He is hell-bent upon this new defense agreement with China, which can pose a great danger to India. हमारे पास और ऑप्शंस क्या है? हमारे पास और ऑप्शंस हैं in a traditional sense that we quietly encourage the opposition in Maldives, that is the MDP. But these things take time. और ये जो factors होते हैं, इनका uncertainty होती है कि कितना टाइम ले सकते हैं. Maybe a few votes here and there and his Muizu's government fall. But again, as I said, there is an uncertainty. We don't know what will happen, because please remember, we are running against a timeline. Once the Chinese move into Maldives and establish a physical presence in Maldives, then there will be big problems for India. Or agar, if we are banking on Abdullah Shahid to turn the tables on Muizu and restore status quo ante, as it is called, with India, that might take a lot of time. We don't know when that would happen. So this entire option of propping up a friendly regime is to some extent theoretical. It is to some extent it is something which is blowing in the wind. There is no certainty that it can actually take off, and so in that particular sense, it is not really an option right now. So let's be clear about that. एक और ऑप्शन होता है जिसे ट्रेडिशनल सेंस में कहते हैं कूदीता। कूदीता हमने तो यहाँ से कभी इंडिया ने कभी करा नहीं, बट आई एम डिस्कसिंग दिस ऑप्शन बिकॉज लॉट ऑफ पावरफुल कंट्रीज ट्राई दीज ऑप्शंस विद स्मॉलर कंट्रीज। कूदीता का मतलब होता है कि आप किसी तरीके से वेदर बाय हुक और क्रुक, बाय स्टेल्थ और बाय फोर्स और व्हाटएवर, यू induce a regime change in that country. Now, it is obviously illegal. There's no question about it. जो भी कूदीतास करवाते हैं, और पहले अफ्रीकन कंट्रीज में हम जानते हैं कि कई वेस्टर्न पावर्स ने कूदीतास करवाए हैं और regime changes करी हैं. I'm just discussing this option. I'm not certainly advocating that India should go in for that. लेकिन ये भी एक ऑप्शन होता है कि आप किसी तरह से regime change करवाएं, आप एक mercenary force वहां पर galvanize कर सकते हैं which can topple the regime out there. So these are various options. I'm running through a list of the options that India can have against Maldives as it stands right now. Though I don't think so, because at the end of the day, we are a moral country. We are morally bound. Our principles are moralistic. We also call ourselves the Vishwa Mitra of the world, and therefore I don't think so we might ever take this particular option, but it is worth considering कि ऐसे options भी available होते हैं. So where does it leave us? So right now, traditional diplomacy with the opposition parties in Maldives is not working out. जो pressure हमने डाला था on Maldives through tourism, और कि हम जो medical जो back and forth है उसको हम squeeze कर ले so that they come to their senses, that probably is also not working, because Muzu is hell bent on the Chinese connection. He's inviting the Chinese. He's already entered into an agreement with India, and knowing the Chinese, they will move in very, very fast to set up a sizable presence on Maldives. And that is why I am discussing the option today of gunboat diplomacy. अब gunboat diplomacy में हम अगर सपोजिंग ये ऑप्शन अगर हम सोचते हैं, अगर ये इस ऑप्शन को हम एक्सरसाइज करते हैं, if we try out this option, what does it really mean? It literally means that, for instance, we don't even have to go into sending our major aircraft carriers like the Vikramaditya or the Vikrant. These are major carriers with so many fixed-wing aircraft and missiles on board. We just have to maybe send one ship, the INS Kolkata, which is a stealth destroyer. It is one of the most powerful destroyers in the world. We just have to send that, and what will this particular ship do? This ship probably would just enter somewhere around the territorial waters of Maldives, stay there, don't fire, don't do anything, but its presence would be enough that it starts a blockade. It doesn't allow any other vessel, ship to enter or leave Maldives. यानी कि आपने पूरे उस आइलैंड का जो Maldives के जो आइलैंड जो वेरियस स्मॉल आइलैंड्स है, आपने एक तरह से ब्लॉकेड कर दिया, और जो उस ब्लॉकेड को वायलेट करेगा, दे वुड हैव टू पे अ प्राइस. This is one way we could do it, a naval blockade. That is the way you project your naval power. You intimidate the other side, because the other side, that is the smaller countries, knows that if they violate the perimeter set by the powerful naval presence of the bigger country, then there will be a certain price to pay. Why are we even talking of gunboat diplomacy? और मैं अब इसके बारे में आपको थोड़ा सा डिटेल में बताना चाहूँगा, because I think this is an important issue we need to understand. Let's take a look at the present world. आज के हालात में जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स हो रहे हैं, स्पेशली द इजरायली गाजा कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, और उसकी एक बेयरिंग है ऑन व्हाट इज हैपनिंग विद द मालदीव्स, और मैं आपको ये लिंक समझाऊंगा अभी. Now, we all know, for instance, that Israel is probably one of the most powerful militaries, not only in the entire Middle East region, but perhaps in the world. It is one of the most advanced, one of the most courageous, I would say, militaries. It has some of the most lethal weapons any country could have. It is like an enviable military, purely on military terms. Israeli actions को आप support करें या ना करें, that's a different issue. I'm not talking about that. But purely on the strength of the Israeli military is a powerful military. अब उनकी लड़ाई किसके साथ हो रही है? उनकी लड़ाई हो रही है गाजा वालों के साथ. और गाजा क्या है? गाजा सिर्फ एक पट्टी है जो कि समुद्र के किनारे है. इट इज अ स्ट्रिप ऑफ लैंड विच हैज a few million Palestinians which live on it. अब ये जो लड़ाई है इसराइल और गाजा की, ये पिछले 2, 2.5, 3 महीने हो गए हैं इसको चल रही है. एंड जस्ट टेक अ वाइल्ड गेस कि इस लड़ाई का अभी तक अंजाम क्या हुआ है. गाजा तो तबाह हो चुका है, वो तो हम जानते ही हैं, वो हम पिक्चर्स भी देख रहे हैं, हम स्टोरीज भी आ रही हैं. बट द स्टोरी विच इज नॉट स्टिल कमिंग आउट प्रॉपरली इज व्हाट इज हैपनिंग टू इजराइल इन द प्रोसेस. And it sounds unbelievable, but this war has actually taken knocking out of Israel. They have lost 5% of their overall economic clout. यानी कि 5% जो उनकी जो पूरी जिसे कहते हैं जो उनकी ग्रोथ थी, जो उनकी क्षमता थी, वो बिल्कुल जिसे कहते हैं कि वो खत्म हो चुकी है. एंड इट विल टेक years before Israel recovers back to its former self. Because what has happened in this war is that so many of Israeli soldiers who are employed, let's say in other professions, in the tech sector, in construction and so many other sectors, they are now on the battlefield, they are fighting a war, and therefore the economy is going down, and the Israeli economy has been hit in a very bad way. रशिया यूक्रेन वॉर में भी अगर आप देख लीजिए तो इस टाइम यूक्रेन की तो जो भी हालत है वो तो हम जानते ही हैं, लेकिन इवन रशिया सफरिंग. व्हाट इज द पॉइंट विच आई एम मेकिंग? द पॉइंट विच आई एम मेकिंग इज, चाहे मालदीव्स जिसे हम कहते हैं पिद्दी सा छोटी सी कंट्री है, इट इज लाइक अ डॉट इन द वास्ट इंडियन ओशन. बट वंस यू हैव अ साइजेबल चाइनीज प्रेजेंस देयर, और थोड़ी बहुत उनकी कुछ इलाकों में पॉपुलेशन भी, and supposing if the Chinese militarize Maldives, or kal they start threatening the Indian southern seaboard, and tomorrow if India decides to take action against Maldives because of whatever it is doing in that particular area, then it is not going to be so easy for India to dislodge hostile presence from Maldives, to subdue the Maldivians, as the Israeli-Gaza war shows us that even smaller, entities like the Gazan, the Palestinians, how much damage they have caused to the Israeli economy, and there is no guarantee tomorrow that, it'll be a quick, easy victory for India. And that is why I am saying that before a problem develops, before a situation goes completely out of control, the Indian government has to exercise certain options to dissuade, I'm using the word deliberately, dissuade the Maldivians from embracing the Chinese, because once that embrace takes place, once the Chinese presence here is established on Maldives, then it can become a huge threat to India. क्योंकि एक बारी जब जिसे कहते हैं कि जब आपकी प्रेजेंस वहां बढ़नी शुरू हो जाती है, हॉस्टाइल प्रेजेंस, और लोकल पॉपुलेशन के साथ को मिंगल हो जाती है, तो उस पूरे चक्र को, उस पूरा जो वहां पर वो स्थापित हो चुका है, जो काल चक्र हो चुका है, उसको उखाड़ना नेक्स्ट टू इम्पॉसिबल हो जाता है, एज इजराइल इज डिस्कवरिंग नाउ इन द वॉर विद Gaza. And therein lies the danger for India. And that is why I'm saying that good, we are trying so many options with Maldives, but maybe the time has come when we have to start thinking of new, a little more aggressive options vis-a-vis Maldives, to sanitize the entire area in the southern seaboard so that the shipping lanes remain free, that navigation remains free, and China cannot intimidate, like for instance it is trying to intimidate various countries in the South China Sea, Philippines hai, Japan, so many other countries, Taiwan ka to karte hi rehte hain all the time. It does not try the same thing with India through the route of Maldives. We have to nip the evil in the bud, as I say, and the time to do that is now. And so, on this note, I come to the end of this episode of the CAA Show. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. And please do subscribe to us. You see that red button on your screen. Press that button, subscribe to us, subscription It's completely free. And as you can see, check our previous episodes also. Our take is completely different. We come up with totally different ideas on the hot button issues of the day. And therefore, keep watching the CAA show, and we'll have come up with another different new idea in the next episode of the CAA show. Goodbye and cheers from my end.